Marcus Brown sat in his small, cluttered studio on the outskirts of the city. Sunlight streamed through the cracked blinds, highlighting the vibrant colors splashed across canvases stacked against the walls. Each piece told a story, raw, evocative, and undeniably powerful. Despite the beauty and depth of his work, Marcus's phone remained silent. The calls to galleries, the emails to curators, and the attempts to connect with influential figures in the art world had all been met with rejection or, worse, silence. He glanced at the invitation on his workbench. It wasn't a personal invitation, just a public announcement for a new exhibit at the prestigious Crane Gallery. The gallery, owned by Leonard Crane, was notorious for its exclusivity and the elitist attitude of its owner. Leonard was a gatekeeper of sorts in the art world, deciding which artists were worth showcasing. Rumor had it that Leonard rarely gave emerging artists a chance, but Marcus saw this as an opportunity to change his fortunes. Maybe this time will be different, Marcus murmured, staring at his reflection in the dusty mirror. He adjusted his shirt, making sure he looked presentable, though he couldn't help but notice the frayed edges of his jacket. Appearance mattered in places like the Crane Gallery, and Marcus knew he was already starting at a disadvantage. The Crane Gallery was as intimidating as Marcus had imagined. Its gleaming white walls displayed massive, abstract works, each piece accompanied by a gold plaque bearing the name of a renowned artist. The air inside smelled faintly of fresh paint and expensive perfume, a testament to the clientele it attracted. Wealthy patrons sipped champagne as they moved from piece to piece, their conversations peppered with words like avant-garde and postmodern genius. Marcus felt out of place, but he tightened his grip on the portfolio he carried, a collection of his best work. His heart pounded as he approached the reception desk, manned by a woman with an icy demeanor. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked without looking up. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Crane," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "I'm an artist, and I think my work might." The woman cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Mr. Crane doesn't meet with artists directly. Submit your portfolio online." "I understand," Marcus said, trying to keep his composure. "But I thought it might be better to show him in person." "My work." Before he could finish, a deep, condescending voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" Marcus turned to see Leonard Crane himself, a tall man with slicked-back silver hair and an impeccable suit. His piercing blue eyes scanned Marcus with thinly veiled disdain. "This gentleman was asking to meet with you," the receptionist explained, clearly annoyed. Leonard's lips curled into a smirk. "An artist, are you? Let me guess, street art? Graffiti? Something raw and authentic, right?" Marcus bristled at the stereotypes, but kept his voice calm. "Actually, my work is a fusion of traditional and modern styles. I think you might find it." Leonard held up a hand to silence him. "Look, I'm sure you're very passionate about your craft," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But this gallery represents a certain caliber of artist. You understand, don't you?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'd appreciate it if you'd just take a look at my portfolio. Let the work speak for itself." Leonard chuckled, a cold, hollow sound. "I don't need to look at it to know it's not what we're looking for. Trust me, I've been in this business long enough to recognize what belongs here, and what doesn't." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He felt the heat of humiliation rise to his face, but he refused to let it show. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice steady, despite the sting of rejection. As Marcus turned to leave, Leonard called after him, a word of advice: "Young man, maybe try a smaller market. You might find an audience more suitable for your work." Laughter rippled through the nearby patrons, who had overheard the exchange. Marcus's fists clenched as he walked out of the gallery, each step heavy with frustration and anger. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap, but it also cleared his mind. He stood on the sidewalk, staring at the bustling city around him. He thought of the long nights spent painting, the sacrifices he'd made, and the dream that had kept him going despite all odds. "I'll prove him wrong," Marcus muttered under his breath. "I'll prove all of them wrong." With renewed determination, he walked back to his studio, the sting of humiliation fueling his resolve. Leonard Crane had underestimated him, but Marcus knew his worth. He would rise above the prejudice and condescension, and when he did, Leonard would remember this day. Marcus Brown sat in his cramped studio late one evening, paintbrush in hand and a half-finished canvas before him. The rhythmic strokes of his brush helped him process the sting of Leonard Crane's scorn. He'd poured his heart into his art, creating pieces that told the stories of struggle, resilience, and the beauty of humanity. Though the Crane Gallery had dismissed him, Marcus knew there was a world beyond its sterile white walls, a world where his work might one day be appreciated. But for now, survival came first. Bills piled up on his desk, and the rent on his studio was overdue. Despite the setbacks, Marcus refused to give up. He poured his emotions into his art, creating pieces that felt more alive and visceral than ever before. His latest collection, titled Soul in Color, was almost ready. All he needed was a venue. The community center downtown wasn't glamorous, but it had been a lifeline for Marcus over the years. The director, Mrs. Jenkins, was a kind woman who believed in supporting local artists. When Marcus approached her about hosting an exhibition, she immediately offered him the space. The night of the exhibit arrived, and Marcus worked tirelessly to transform the modest hall into a vibrant gallery. Friends and family helped hang the paintings, arrange lighting, and set up refreshments. It wasn't the Crane Gallery, but it was a start. As the evening progressed, the room filled with familiar faces, neighbors, fellow artists, and a handful of local art enthusiasts. Marcus moved through the crowd, answering questions and sharing the stories behind his work. The reception was warm, but he couldn't ignore the nagging fear that this was as far as he'd go. Then, something unexpected happened. Near the end of the evening, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet confidence entered the room. Marcus recognized him immediately, Daniel Carter, a renowned art collector known for discovering hidden talent. Daniel had built a reputation for spotting brilliance in places others overlooked, and his presence at the exhibit felt almost surreal. Marcus watched nervously as Daniel moved through the room, studying each painting with intense focus. When Daniel stopped in front of Eternal Struggle, a powerful piece depicting a lone figure standing against a storm, Marcus's heart raced. The collector stood there for what felt like an eternity, before turning to Marcus. "Is this your work?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but commanding. "Yes," Marcus replied, trying to mask his nerves. "It's part of a series I've been working on." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "It's extraordinary. Your use of color and texture, it's raw and honest, but there's a refinement to it. I haven't seen anything like this in years." Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Thank you. That means a lot. I'd like to buy this piece," Daniel said, gesturing to Eternal Struggle. "And a few others, if they're available. I also want to discuss getting your work into larger galleries. This is too good to stay in a community center." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Daniel introduced Marcus to influential curators and gallery owners, people who saw the value in his work without prejudice. His art quickly gained traction, attracting attention from critics and collectors alike. Exhibitions in prominent galleries followed, each one more successful than the last. Within months, Marcus's name was on everyone's lips. His paintings sold for prices he'd once thought unimaginable, and the demand for his work skyrocketed. Major media outlets covered his rise, lauding him as a visionary whose art captured the essence of the human experience. Despite his success, Marcus never forgot the moments of rejection and humiliation he'd endured. One day, while reading a business journal, he stumbled upon an article about Leonard Crane. The once mighty gallery owner was now struggling to keep his business afloat. Changing tastes and a saturated market had left Leonard scrambling to attract new investors. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Leonard, who had dismissed him so cruelly, was now fighting for survival in the very world he once dominated. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind. This wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption, about proving that talent and determination could overcome prejudice and arrogance. He decided it was time to pay Leonard Crane a visit, not as a struggling artist, but as a man who had achieved everything Leonard claimed he never would. Marcus smiled as he gazed at his latest painting, a vivid depiction of a phoenix rising from the ashes. It felt fitting. His journey was far from over, but he was ready for the next chapter. Despite his success, Marcus never forgot the moments of rejection and humiliation he'd endured. One day, while reading a business journal, he stumbled upon an article about Leonard Crane. The once mighty gallery owner was now struggling to keep his business afloat. Changing tastes and a saturated market had left Leonard scrambling to attract new investors. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Leonard, who had dismissed him so cruelly, was now fighting for survival in the very world he once dominated. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind. This wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption, about proving that talent and determination could overcome prejudice and arrogance. He decided it was time to pay Leonard Crane a visit, not as a struggling artist, but as a man who had achieved everything Leonard claimed he never would. Marcus smiled as he gazed at his latest painting, a vivid depiction of a phoenix rising from the ashes. It felt fitting. His journey was far from over, but he was ready for the next chapter. "I'm interested in making an investment," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "I've been looking into acquiring a gallery, and yours caught my attention." Leonard's eyes lit up with interest. The Crane Gallery had been hemorrhaging money for months, and the prospect of an investor was exactly what he needed. He leaned forward eagerly. "That's wonderful to hear. The Crane Gallery is a pillar of the art community, a place where the finest works are showcased. With the right investment, I believe we could take it to even greater heights." Marcus glanced around the gallery, noting the uninspired pieces on display and the sparse attendance. "It seems like your gallery's reputation has taken a hit recently," he said, his tone casual but pointed. "I've heard whispers that you're struggling to stay afloat." Leonard's face darkened for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Every business has its ups and downs," he said smoothly. "But with the right partnerships, we can turn things around." Marcus let the silence linger for a moment, enjoying Leonard's discomfort. Then, he stood and walked over to one of the paintings on display, a generic abstract piece with an exorbitant price tag. "Tell me, Mr. Crane, do you personally choose the artists you showcase here?" "Of course," Leonard replied, puffing up slightly. "I have a keen eye for talent. It's what sets this gallery apart." Marcus turned to face him, his expression cool. "Interesting. Because I remember being here about a year ago, showing you my work. You didn't seem to think much of it then." Leonard blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "I'm sorry, I don't recall." "You wouldn't," Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. "You dismissed me before you even looked at my portfolio. Told me I wasn't the right caliber for your gallery. Mocked me in front of your patrons. Do you remember that now?" Leonard's face paled as the memory resurfaced. I see," he stammered. "Mr. Brown, I assure you, it wasn't personal. I deal with so many artists, and sometimes—" Marcus held up a hand to silence him. "Save it. I didn't come here for an apology. I came here to make you an offer." Leonard swallowed hard. "An offer?" "I'll buy this gallery outright," Marcus said, his tone firm. "I'll take it off your hands, pay off your debts, and give it the fresh start it desperately needs." Leonard's eyes widened. "You want to buy the Crane Gallery? Just like that?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his gaze steady. "But there's one condition." Leonard hesitated. "And that is?" "You step down," Marcus said. "No more Leonard Crane. No more gatekeeping. This gallery will become a place for all artists, regardless of where they come from or what they look like." Leonard's jaw tightened, the weight of the decision evident in his expression. The Crane Gallery was his life's work, but his pride had driven it to the brink of collapse. Now, the man he had dismissed so cruelly was offering him salvation, but at the cost of his legacy. Marcus stepped closer, his voice softer but no less commanding. "This isn't just about the money. It's about what this gallery represents. You had the chance to build something meaningful, but you chose to close the door on people like me. Now, I'm giving you a way out. Leonard was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Very well, Mr. Brown. The gallery is yours. Marcus extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Leonard shook it. The deal was done, and the power had shifted. As Marcus left the gallery that day, he felt a sense of vindication, not just for himself, but for every artist who had ever been overlooked or dismissed. This was just the beginning of something bigger, and Marcus was ready to make his mark. The contract was signed, the ink still fresh as Marcus Brown officially became the owner of the Crane Gallery. The weight of the moment didn't escape him as he stood in Leonard Crane's former office, a room filled with heavy mahogany furniture and shelves of untouched art books. The irony was palpable. This space, once a symbol of exclusivity and rejection, was now his to reshape. Leonard sat across from Marcus, his hands clasped tightly together. The confident, condescending man who had dismissed Marcus a year ago was now a shadow of himself. His posture was tense, his ego clearly bruised by the reversal of power. I assume you'll want to keep the Crane name, Leonard said, forcing a thin smile. It carries a certain prestige, after all. Marcus leaned back in the chair, his expression unreadable. No, Mr. Crane. The name will change. The gallery will no longer be a symbol of gatekeeping and exclusion. It will stand for something bigger, diversity, opportunity, and a celebration of all voices, not just the ones deemed acceptable by people like you. Leonard flinched at the bluntness of Marcus's words. And what do you intend to call it, then? Marcus allowed a small smile. The Unity Gallery. Leonard's lips pressed into a thin line. I see, he said stiffly. And what about the current roster of artists? Many of them are quite established. I'm aware, Marcus said. Some of them will stay, but the focus will shift. We'll feature artists who've been overlooked, those from marginalized communities, those who tell stories the world needs to hear. This gallery will become a platform for change. Leonard's expression hardened. You're throwing away decades of reputation for what? A social experiment? Marcus's gaze was steady. For progress. And because it's the right thing to do. The rebranding of the gallery was a monumental task. Marcus poured his heart into every detail, from the design of the new logo to the selection of the first exhibition under the Unity Gallery name. He reached out to artists he admired, painters, sculptors, and photographers who had faced the same rejections and barriers he once had. The response was overwhelming. For many, this was their first chance to showcase their work in a space that truly valued their voices. Meanwhile, the story of the gallery's transformation began to spread. Word of Leonard Crane's fall from grace, and Marcus Brown's rise to power, caught the attention of the media. Headlines painted Marcus as a trailblazer, a symbol of justice and empowerment in an industry often criticized for its exclusivity. Reporters clamored for interviews, eager to hear Marcus's story. In one particularly powerful segment, Marcus sat before the camera and spoke candidly about his journey. I was dismissed before my work was even seen, he said, his voice steady but impassioned. That's the reality for so many artists who don't fit the mold of what's considered acceptable. But art is meant to challenge, to provoke, and to inspire. It doesn't belong in a box. The public response was overwhelming. Social media lit up with messages of support, and artists from around the world shared their stories of perseverance and rejection. The Unity Gallery quickly became a symbol of hope and change, a beacon for those who had been pushed to the margins. Leonard Crane, meanwhile, found himself grappling with the loss of his gallery. He remained in the background during the transition, his role reduced to an observer. Watching Marcus succeed where he had failed was a bitter pill to swallow, but even Leonard couldn't deny the gallery's growing influence. One day, as the gallery prepared for its grand reopening, Leonard approached Marcus. His expression was a mix of regret and reluctant respect. You've made quite the impact, he admitted. The Unity Gallery, it's something I never could have imagined. Marcus turned to face him, his gaze calm but unyielding. Because you never tried. You saw art as a commodity, not as a way to tell stories or bring people together. That's the difference between us. Leonard nodded slowly, the weight of his own shortcomings evident in his demeanor. Maybe you're right. Maybe I lost sight of what really matters. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out at the gallery floor, now filled with vibrant, diverse pieces that reflected the richness of human experience. It's never too late to change, he said finally. But it starts with acknowledging the harm you've done. Leonard didn't reply, but his silence spoke volumes. The grand reopening of the gallery was a momentous occasion. The Unity Gallery was packed with attendees, from local art lovers to international critics. The walls were adorned with pieces that told stories of resilience, hope, and transformation. Marcus stood at the center of it all, surrounded by artists whose voices were finally being heard. As he gave his opening speech, Marcus's words resonated with everyone in the room. This gallery is not just about art, he said. It's about creating a space where everyone has a seat at the table. It's about recognizing that creativity knows no boundaries, and that every story deserves to be told. The applause was thunderous, a testament to the impact Marcus had already made. The Unity Gallery was more than a rebranded space, it was a movement. For Leonard, the event was bittersweet. He watched from the sidelines, a man forced to confront his own failures. But even he couldn't deny the power of what Marcus had created. As the night came to a close, Marcus stood before a painting of a phoenix rising from the ashes. It was one of his own pieces, a reminder of his journey and the transformation he had undergone. I was dismissed before my work was even seen, he said, his voice steady but impassioned. That's the reality for so many artists who don't fit the mold of what's considered acceptable. But art is meant to challenge, to provoke, and to inspire. It doesn't belong in a box. The public response was overwhelming. Social media lit up with messages of support, and artists from around the world shared their stories of perseverance and rejection. The Unity Gallery quickly became a symbol of hope and change, a beacon for those who had been pushed to the margins. Leonard Crane, meanwhile, found himself grappling with the loss of his gallery. He remained in the background during the transition, his role reduced to an observer. Watching Marcus succeed where he had failed was a bitter pill to swallow, but even Leonard couldn't deny the gallery's growing influence. One day, as the gallery prepared for its grand reopening, Leonard approached Marcus. His expression was a mix of regret and reluctant respect. You've made quite the impact, he admitted. The Unity Gallery, it's something I never could have imagined. Marcus turned to face him, his gaze calm but unyielding. Because you never tried. You saw art as a commodity, not as a way to tell stories or bring people together. That's the difference between us. Leonard nodded slowly, the weight of his own shortcomings evident in his demeanor. Maybe you're right. Maybe I lost sight of what really matters. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out at the gallery floor, now filled with vibrant, diverse pieces that reflected the richness of human experience. It's never too late to change, he said finally. But it starts with acknowledging the harm you've done. Leonard didn't reply, but his silence spoke volumes. The grand reopening of the gallery was a momentous occasion. The Unity Gallery was packed with attendees, from local art lovers to international critics. The walls were adorned with pieces that told stories of resilience, hope, and transformation. Marcus stood at the center of it all, surrounded by artists whose voices were finally being heard. As he gave his opening speech, Marcus's words resonated with everyone in the room. This gallery is not just about art, he said. It's about creating a space where everyone has a seat at the table. It's about recognizing that creativity knows no boundaries, and that every story deserves to be told. The applause was thunderous, a testament to the impact Marcus had already made. The Unity Gallery was more than a rebranded space, it was a movement. For Leonard, the event was bittersweet. He watched from the sidelines, a man forced to confront his own failures. But even he couldn't deny the power of what Marcus had created. As the night came to a close, Marcus stood before a painting of a phoenix rising from the ashes. It was one of his own pieces, a reminder of his journey and the transformation he had undergone. The Unity Gallery wasn't just a testament to Marcus's success, it was proof that change was possible, even in the most rigid and exclusive spaces. It marked the beginning of a new era, one where art was truly for everyone. The Unity Gallery was unrecognizable from its former self. The cold, sterile atmosphere that once pervaded the space had been replaced with vibrant energy. The walls, no longer a monotone white, were alive with bold and eclectic works of art. Every corner of the gallery celebrated diversity, vivid sculptures, intricate textile works, multimedia installations, and paintings that spoke to the soul. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was cultural. Marcus Brown had created a sanctuary for creativity, a space where stories of resilience, heritage, and innovation could flourish without the constraints of gatekeeping. The gallery's tagline, "Art for All," had become a rallying cry for artists and patrons alike. In the months following the gallery's reopening, the Unity Gallery became a cultural phenomenon. Every exhibition drew massive crowds, with people traveling from across the country to witness the groundbreaking work of underrepresented artists. Marcus's vision of inclusion had tapped into a wellspring of talent and passion, and the gallery's success was unparalleled. One exhibition, Roots and Branches, showcased indigenous artists who used traditional techniques to tell contemporary stories. Another, The Diaspora Diaries, featured works by African and Caribbean artists exploring themes of migration and identity. Each exhibit was a celebration of perspectives that had long been ignored by mainstream art institutions. Marcus ensured that the gallery wasn't just a place to display art but also a hub for education and collaboration. Workshops, artist talks, and mentorship programs became integral parts of its mission. Emerging artists found guidance and opportunities to refine their craft, while established artists found a platform to experiment and give back to the community. The success of the Unity Gallery had a ripple effect across the art world. Other galleries and institutions began re-evaluating their own practices, inspired by Marcus's bold vision. Marcus was often invited to speak at conferences and panels, where he shared his journey and advocated for systemic change in the arts. "I didn't set out to make a statement," Marcus said during one such talk. "I just wanted to create a space where people could be seen, where their stories could be heard. But if that inspires change beyond these walls, then I consider it a privilege to be part of that movement." Meanwhile, Leonard Crane watched from the sidelines. Having stepped away from the gallery after its sale, he found himself grappling with the weight of his decisions. For decades, Leonard had operated under the belief that art was a business, a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. He'd ignored the voices of countless talented artists, dismissing them for not fitting his narrow definition of worthy. Now, seeing the gallery's transformation under Marcus's leadership, Leonard couldn't deny the truth: he had been wrong. The art world was richer, more vibrant, and more impactful, because of the very people he had once overlooked. Leonard spent his days in quiet reflection, attending exhibitions at the Unity Gallery not as a gatekeeper but as an observer. He lingered in front of the works he once might have dismissed, trying to understand the stories they told. With each visit, he felt the sting of regret but also the faint stirrings of hope. Perhaps, he thought, it wasn't too late to learn and grow. The turning point came during an exhibition titled Second Chances. The show featured works by formerly incarcerated artists, each piece a testament to resilience and the power of creative expression. Leonard found himself moved to tears by a painting of a shattered mirror, its pieces meticulously reassembled into a mosaic that reflected a new, fractured beauty. As he stood there, Marcus approached, his presence commanding but not unkind. "It's powerful, isn't it?" Marcus said, gesturing to the painting. Leonard nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is. I see things differently now, Marcus. I see what I missed." Marcus studied him for a moment before replying. "Acknowledging that is a start. Change isn't easy, Leonard, but it's necessary." Leonard turned to face Marcus, his expression one of genuine remorse. "You've done something extraordinary here. More than I ever could." "It's not about what you could or couldn't do," Marcus said. "It's about what you do next." As the years went on, the Unity Gallery became more than just a gallery, it became a movement. It inspired countless artists from marginalized communities to pursue their dreams, knowing there was a place where their voices would be valued. Young artists who had once felt invisible now saw themselves reflected in the gallery's walls, their stories celebrated and respected. One evening, as Marcus stood in the gallery's main hall during a bustling opening night, he looked around at what he had built. The space was alive with conversation and laughter, the walls adorned with art that challenged, inspired, and provoked thought. Patrons of all backgrounds mingled, united by their love of creativity and the stories it told. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to reflect on his journey, from the struggling artist humiliated by Leonard Crane to the visionary leader of a global movement. He thought of the countless obstacles he'd faced, the sacrifices he'd made, and the people who had believed in him when no one else did. As the evening's keynote speaker, Marcus stepped up to the podium. The crowd quieted, their eyes fixed on him with admiration and respect. "This gallery is proof that art is for everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady and heartfelt. "It's a place where stories are told, where barriers are broken, and where dreams are realized. But it's more than that. It's a reminder that change is possible, even in the most entrenched systems. Together, we can create a world where every voice matters, where every story is heard." The applause that followed was deafening. As Marcus stepped down, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The Unity Gallery wasn't just a testament to his success, it was a beacon of hope, a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. And in that moment, standing amid the vibrant energy of the gallery, Marcus Brown knew he had truly triumphed.